All right, and we are back for episode 59 of Digital Divination, but actually it's not we, it's me, and I have a new co-host, Jason Keeley.
Hello, it's me. I'm here too. My
Yeah.
goodness.
So this is the new us, and I am so glad to actually get to know you better on the show now because I don't really know you very well, but also to have a bona fide Starfinder developer now on our
Hmm.
Starfinder show rather than our pseudo kind of Starfinder guy Ron Lundeen on the show
What does he
before.
know?
Well, he'd
No,
written a
he knows
little
a
bit of
lot. Yes,
Starfinder,
he's written a
and
little bit of it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but he doesn't know all the nuts and bolts of the Star Chamber, and he often refer to that. Well, this is how we do it on the Pathfinder side, but they might do
Right.
things a little different there. But welcome,
It's true.
thanks for joining us on this journey. Now that we've gone 59 episodes, and Ron said we have to go at least 41 more
Yeah, I
to
heard.
get
Yeah,
to 100.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
are you game
Well,
for that?
I'm game for that. Thank you, Frank, for inviting me to this, and I look forward to getting to know you in this process as well. Because, like you said, we've met a few times, we've talked a few times, but we don't really know anything about one another.
Yeah, and it's different than with Ron and I because I had actually played with Ron for a couple years. Actually
Hmm.
met him before he joined Paizo. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, it was like a week before, but
Oh, fair enough.
he'd
Fair enough.
already moved here, and I was looking for players, and he saw my posting, and he said, "Hey,
Oh.
yeah, I'm interested in Starfinder," and we got him going right before he started up, so it was kind of funny.
Did you
So
did you
this
post
is
that like on the Paizo forums or just on social media somewhere?
No, this is old school. Actually, I posted
Oh,
at Zulu's game cap
oh,
where I happen to live and where Ron happened to be living at the time.
yeah. I think
And
I've been there a couple times.
yeah, I was trying to get something going there. In addition, we had a home group, which Scott Kime started with me,
Right.
and
Hmm.
trying to fill in for a couple players. Um,
Wow. It's always fascinating how people kind of get connected up
yeah.
with each other for gaming groups. Like I, growing up, I was more of like a video game player than sort
Yeah.
of an old school role playing game player. But yeah, I mean, of course, I would run about into the woods with a stick and pretend it's a sword every once in a while with my
Yeah.
cousins, whatever. But I didn't really start playing. I played it maybe like once. My friend, one of my high school friends' dad would run a game, but I was never invited to it, so I didn't really play a bunch until after college. When I moved back to New York City, a college friend of mine, she was like, "Oh, I know all these guys from the Renaissance Fair, and they're
Yeah.
actors, and they're running these games." And I was like, "Oh, sure, I'll meet these friends and play their games." And it was the beginning of a long journey with them, and I know all of them still. I don't actually play with any of them.
Right.
Pretty much at this point, but I play with some other people. But that was just sort of an amazing group of people who what ended up being is one of the guy who ran most of the games was he's an actor. He teaches acting now, I think, in Texas, and he did a lot of homebrews. He homebrewed all of his stuff. Nearly every game that we played, he created on his
Right.
own.
Right. Right.
And so that was a lot of fun. So I got to learn a little bit about games because after a while he came and asked me about we started working together on stuff.
Hmm.
And that is the eventual origination of my stuff that I'd worked on before I came to work for Paizo, a little third party 3.5 stuff, and then
Hmm.
a fully standalone game based on the tarot deck. They use the tarot deck as a
Oh, right.
conflict
Right. Right.
resolution.
Right.
Both of those things are still sort of basically out of print. I think I saw a copy of just pretty recently a copy of that game, Fortune's Fool, the tarot game, on eBay for like $80 or something, which is kind of interesting.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of fun.
The
Yeah,
collectible then, huh?
might just be a collectible. I have a couple, and we printed some of them in black and white, and we printed some
Yeah.
of them in full color. And the color ones are the rare ones. If you have a color copy of Fortune's Fool out there, I don't know. Let me know. I would love to. I'd love to see it.
Nice.
And it's funny. And then we would run that game at Gen Con every year for a couple of years.
Wow.
And at even the most recent Gen Con that I was at, which was in 2019, a couple came up to me and was like, "Hey, do you remember me? You ran Fortune School for us, and we're still playing it." I'm like, "Oh my god, no way!" And yeah, I'm working at Pi. I was in Paizo's booth at that point, right? And
Right,
so it
right.
was, it was it's amazing how these connections get made, and we hold on to them for so long, and form these great, I don't know, adult friendships.
Yeah, no, it's funny, the group that I started playing with Ron, one of the players in there was my high school DM when I first started playing Dungeons& and Dragons,
Mhm,
and I'm still playing with him now, but kinda like you, I had a big gap where I played a lot of video games.
mhm.
I played, probably the I still play now. I started playing, Diablo, right? Diablo
Oh
2
yeah.
and stuff like that. I played Neverwinter Nights, which is a kind of a 3.0, 3.5 conversion they had by
Yep.
BioWare. Ran a couple persistent worlds. And then I got really heavy duty into Guild Wars, which is
Oh,
actually
okay.
kind of written here locally. And for a while, I led the world's largest guild. We had 600 to 700 members. I was in international PvP competitions. I
Uh-huh.
sponsored online tournaments with real prizes from around
Mhm.
the world. Did a lot of writing, for them. And
Right.
but one of the things I found with video games, and one of the reasons why I turned back to role playing games, tabletop, is I miss the interaction with face to face
Yeah.
with people, which is
Yeah,
really
yeah,
funny during the pandemic that we've
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
gotten away from that.
Fair enough.
But
Yeah.
no, I really I'm one of the people that started with the old uh, D&D box that didn't even mine didn't even have dice. They had slips of paper. You had to cut them
Oh
up,
my
and then
gosh.
you draw out a number from a cup. That's how you
Oh,
randomly
wow.
generated numbers. So it
Yeah.
was
I did have a red box. I
yeah.
remember having a red box set, when I was in high school, but I never got to play it with anyone at the time.
So just to back up a little bit, where are you
Sure.
from originally?
I, was born in Southern New Jersey.
Okay,
So I'm
which
from the East
exit?
Coast. 4. Exit 4.
Okay.
It's a classic joke for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's sort of near, not too far outside of Philadelphia, maybe about half an hour
Okay.
outside of
Right. Right.
Philadelphia, in that area, and, just kind of was there for a while until I left. Went to, college in Delaware, University of Delaware,
Oh,
and then
neat.
I, moved up to New York City, and I lived there for a while. I lived in Connecticut, lived in Richmond, Virginia, for about a year, and then New York City again, and now here in Redmond, Washington.
And you moved here specifically for Paizo, or were you doing
Yeah,
something else?
no, I moved here specifically for Paizo. I got the job, and I kind of actually found out that I got the job right before I went on a cruise. So I went on a big cruise, and also, yeah, also at the time I was doing RPG Superstar and had to kind of like knew I was
Right.
getting the job and had to kind of drop out from there in a weird, in a surreptitious manner without saying why. Just, oh, I
Right.
can't do it.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Right.
Um, when I was on the cruise, and I was sort of like kind of telling people it was kind of a nerdy cruise, so people knew most people knew us. So, oh, I'm gonna work for them. And that was right before my 40th birthday, so that was a little bit of a milestone,
Mhm.
in a ways. And then I bought a car, and had movers come and pack up a bunch of stuff, and then drove across the country, with my wife. And we rented this apartment that I'm in, that you see kind of around you, kind of sight unseen. We had seen pictures of it, but we didn't know what the inside looked like. So it
Right. Right.
was a bit of a gamble. But then again, a lot of people were these apartments are like a 5-minute walk from the Paizo offices, so it's sort of just be like a bunch of people kind of live around here. Why, oh
Right.
great, we'll just and they did at the time, and so yeah, I've been here since there.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of neat. I've had a little bit different background in that
Hmm.
my father was in the service, and so I moved around quite a bit as a child. Um, Hawaii, Southern
Mhm.
California, Florida, Philippines, Washington, where I'm at now. We were on Whidbey Island at the time. Um, I moved around quite a bit, them, and then I was in the service as well. I was in the Coast Guard. I actually went to the Coast Guard Academy in Connecticut, and so that's how I kinda know about the, which exit thing for if you're from New
Oh,
Jersey, 'cause that's what
right.
we did all the time. I've been to Delaware and, Philadelphia and a bunch of those places, but only mostly when I was in school. I'd gone back much. When I got out of the service, I was in about 10 years, had mostly law enforcement, some ice breaking work for them. And then I actually started teaching at the Coast Guard Academy itself. I moved back
Mhm.
to Connecticut and I decided I want to be a full time professor. I started actually classes at UConn. And
Mm,
then when I decided to go full time, I went to Michigan. That's where I went and got a master's and got a doctorate there. And from there, I went to Oregon to teach, University of Oregon. I moved up here, was at University of Washington in Bothell teaching, and now I'm over at Seattle Pacific, which is over on Queen Anne. Oh, and I teach
okay. Well,
business classes.
okay, there you go. I was just about to ask.
Yeah, so marketing, I teach entrepreneurship, organizational behavior, intro to business. I kind of have consider myself a consumer psychologist, so that's kind of what
Mhm.
my research area is. Actually, did a coursework for a PhD in business and a PhD in psychology, and so I really
Mhm.
like social psychology and social cognition. So kind of the cross between how you think and how when you interact with others, how that affects your thinking. And I look at decision making, the things that improve or bias people's decision making.
Yeah. I tell you, John, I could have used you about 10 years back when I was had the small press publishing company because it was just like three guys and none of us had any real business acumen. I'll tell you.
Well, that's really typical. I mean,
Yeah.
oftentimes you have somebody who's got good technical skills, and so I teach entrepreneurship and I actually do consulting with businesses. Oftentimes you have somebody who's really strong technical skills. They have a drive, and so they get involved in operations. But because they don't have, a more managerial background or a strategic background, they always kind of focus on the day to day, and they don't have the opportunity to think bigger picture, and it
Yeah.
just becomes super stressful for them
Yeah.
usually.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Definitely.
So, what did you do in college? What was your focus there?
Well, that's kind of a funny story, I guess. I went into college. I chose the University of Delaware because they had a pretty good bunch of science programs. I
Hmm.
was considered myself that I wanted to be some kind of scientist. So I majored in biochemistry for 2 years. The first year was also the basic chemistry, organic
Right,
chemistry, that
right,
kind of
right.
stuff. I started doing some lab work, as a
Hmm.
kind of an intern during the summers, and that second year, that second summer, I was doing a lot of stuff, and I was just kind of like sitting in a lab and looking at a machine and exchanging a test tube when it beeped up until like 2 or 3 in the morning or some nonsense stuff. I That summer I accidentally flooded the lab uh, because I left. There was a machine you had to run sort of water through to keep it cool, basically, and then the
Right.
tube would go when it's supposed to go into the sink. I left the water running, and when I went home for that night, and apparently the tube at one point slipped off, so the nozzle, which would the tube would have led into the sink, was just sort of spewing out onto the table, right, and then onto the floor. And so the actual grad student who I was sort of like helping out was there at some point and like then noticed his feet was getting wet.
Yeah.
And he, kind of yelled at me after that. I was like, I had to run away and I messed up my titrations, and that sort of thing. And also during that summer, a little bit before the year before that, I was really heavily involved with the student theater group, well, one of the
Mhm.
two student theater groups that was there. And that summer, we were doing a bunch of one act plays by a playwright named David Ives. I don't know
Mhm.
if you've ever read or heard of it, or seen anything by David Ives, but
I've heard of them, but I don't know.
he does kind of surrealistic kind of
Mhm.
stuff. One act we did was we were the three monkeys typing away at the typewriter trying to write Hamlet.
Yeah.
There's one that's basically every time this couple is trying to have a date, and every time one of them rings a bell, they have to start over. Um, Stuff like that. It was a real lot of fun, and I was like, "This is way more fun than any kind of science stuff that I'm working on." So, come that fall, I changed my major to English with a concentration in dramatic studies. Yeah, that's helped and I did a lot more theater. I did a lot of improv at that point. After that point too, so that's helped my GMing skills. That's for sure.
Were you GMing at the time?
No,
Oh, that was
the
after,
thing
right?
it was afterwards, yeah. But at
Yeah.
the time, it was. I'll tell you though, I was aware of role playing games, obviously
Mhm.
at the time, and I had some close friends that probably would have been playing with, and I looked at them, and I remember thinking, if I get into this, that's it for me. I will never do anything else because it looks like a whole lot of
Yeah.
fun, and I do a lot of. I was doing a lot of improv, and it's like 95% improv, just with some rules every once in a while. And I
Mhm,
was right.
mhm.
I mean, once I started doing it, it was kind of like my became my identity essentially. Um, so I just sort of was like, oh, but then maybe I'll become an actor or whatever after college. And I never really did that. I didn't really, and I did a couple uh, community theater projects in like Delaware after
Mhm.
immediately after graduating. But then I started working, having to do,
Right,
work.
right.
I was working at Borders bookstore, so there was that, and then I started doing temp work in New York City, and eventually I just kind of fell into becoming a crossword puzzle editor.
Wow.
Yeah, and for a company called Penny Press, it was headquartered up in Connecticut. So for a long time, I would get up. I lived in Brooklyn. I'd get up on the train, take the train into Grand Central Station, take a Metro North train up to this small stop called East Norwalk,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
then their offices were just like another couple feet away from the train station. So that was and I met a couple of people who were doing the exact same thing. So we rode the train together, and we would, just sort of, you know, either chat during the train or more likely than not fall asleep on that train ride up.
Right,
Just
right.
to get a couple another 45 minutes of sleep
Yeah.
before going to work. That's how I learned how to sleep on trains just long enough to not miss my stop.
Right, right.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And yeah,
is
yeah, I
a
did that for a while.
crossword puzzle editor, what do you actually do?
So, to get drill into the specifics, for the first couple years that I worked at this, I was a logic puzzle editor. And if you're
Okay.
familiar with logic puzzles, they are basically you get a bunch of statements that are there's a bunch of variables like here are five people, they're each wearing a different color shirt, and each of them is eating a different type of sandwich. And then you get a bunch of statements that are like Bob did not eat the chicken salad sandwich, et cetera, et cetera. It's stuff you might find on like the LSAT too, right?
Right.
Um, so this company put out books of these, and they were all little. You have to do little stories, so that was kind of fun. I get to write a little story for each one, justify why all these people were doing weird nonsense, and then test solve them, make sure that they were made logical. They had to write the solution, that kind of thing. So that was going on for a while, but as you can imagine, those don't sell very well.
Right.
Role playing is a niche market, but puzzle magazines is probably just as niche a market, and maybe
Yeah.
even nichier. Back in the day, it was a print magazine,
Right.
and at that time, sort of like Sudoku was becoming a big craze, and those you could make, but with a computer program and print like
Mhm.
hundreds of them at a time, and just sort of sell those. So the logic puzzle business was not lucrative, and eventually I actually left that company, and that's why I spent a year in Richmond, Virginia, trying to get a job for a bigger company. And I ended up working. I tell you, I backed a lot of winners. I ended up working for the Circuit City corporate headquarters, working on their um,
Mhm.
like in-house magazine for their stereo sellers and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But that was not very fulfilling. So I eventually the happened that Penny Press was needed more people again. So I moved
Mhm.
back to New York City to work for them, and that's when I started working a lot of times in their New York office, so I didn't have to travel as far. Um, and then eventually, kind of like from home for like 3 days out of the week, and then I got into the crossword puzzle editing, which was um, again what I worked on with the easy or puzzles. So those were actually the grids were generated by a computer.
Mhm.
So you would just like, I need, here, this month's 100 easy puzzles. Go into the filing cabinet, pull out the printouts of 100 puzzles, and look at the whatever computer codes are on there, and just sort of flip through them and make sure the computer didn't mess anything up or didn't accidentally print a curse word or whatever. And then we use a sort of an in-house program to clue all of them from a database. We had the huge database of clues that were designated easy, so you get, and this happens a lot in easy crossword puzzles, the name Alan, and so you'd be like Alan Alda, Alan Harkin, any of the other Allens that might be. Um, and then you just sort of pick that. And I could go through and do, and these are about, I would say, I think they were about 15 by 15 squares on
Mhm.
the side. I could probably do like 5 or 6 of those in a day's work pretty easily. Sort of like, and each of them had about 50 clues, I want to say, around about there. Maybe a little less, maybe 40. So yeah, so that was basically it. After doing that for about a year was when I sort of began to get every week I would also help make one of the harder crosswords by suggesting clues for the more original, more interesting clues for other words. So even if it was Alan, I'd have to come up with like, oh, there's some more obscure Alan or something like that, or an obscure Alan Alda role, you know,
Right.
to sort of make the puzzle harder.
So you had to have a kind of a rich background of knowledge related
Yeah,
to various topics in order to come up with original clues then too.
yeah, it didn't hurt. But at that point, of course, there was the internet did exist, so it
Right.
was not too difficult to start googling stuff and finding things, and that's sort of like, I always have loved puzzles. I used to do Games Magazine,
Right.
back in the day. I used to have a subscription to that. So this was kind of a one of those things where it's a dream come true to work for them. But then it was also not for Games Making, but a dream come true to work on puzzles. But after a while, it got a little, oh, now I see how the sausage is made. This is a little less interesting. Um, but I came back to it these days, as sort of Ron would have mentioned last time. The puzzle, the PaizoCon puzzle hunt
Right.
that Joe
Right.
Piscini and I started. I'm still doing puzzles now, for fun instead of for work.
So how did you transition from puzzle editing to RPG writing? So you were doing some freelance work with your tarot
Yeah.
game, and then how did that get you over to Paizo?
Oh yeah. Before that, when I started playing the games,
Hmm.
I think I do this thing where I like something and then I want to kind of just make my own of it. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like, oh, this is very good. This is a very good novel. I should write a book. This is
right.
a pretty cool you know video game. I should maybe try to think about how to make a video game. Um. So I kind of got started that playing when I started playing them, and then a friend of mine from college was like, hey, you know, let's make a game. And this is not the guy that I was playing with, but I eventually roped him in, and we started working on these things. And that's why I sort of started honing my editing skills even more so, and not exactly broadening them away because editing crossword puzzles is a very specific
Right. Right.
version of editing things, right? Um, but broadening my editing skills a little bit, and then just after doing that for a little bit and getting some recognition, Fortune's Fold did win an Emmy, which was pretty cool.
Hmm.
That was the year we decided not to go to the ceremony, but whatever. And then just sort of putting out the feelers to you know s- seeing that Paizo was doing the RPG Superstar stuff and sort of beginning to
Hmm.
submit for that, and just seeing that at one point, just seeing that they had a job opening. And actually, the first time I applied to be an editor at Paizo, I didn't get it because at the time that I was told that it was going to be more of a contract position or a real short position, and James Sutter, who was the one of the people who interviewed me and who was at the time sort of like the managing editor. Um, he said, "Oh, I don't want you to come move out here for just what might not be a job after 6 months, but you should contact these people, maybe start doing some freelance for us." So I did some freelance editing, and I started doing some freelance writing. And then the next time a job opening came up, I went for it. And that time I was actually applying to be a developer. But then at the same time, they had that same editing position kind of open up again, or maybe it was a different one. And then Sutter contacted me and says, you're still in the running for the developer position, but I could also offer you this editing position. Well, take the guaranteed thing or try to get a different, So I was like, oh, I'll take the guaranteed thing, and that's how I, came to be. And then from there, once you get into Paizo in the foot in the door and start getting a little more freelance, you get to know things a little better, and
Right.
then uh, not that everyone moves away out of editing to development or design, but a lot, there is a sort of a precedent there. There's been a precedent there, and that's what eventually happened to me.
Mhm. Now, who got the design position you were playing for, do you know?
That was Amanda.
Oh,
It was Amanda
really?
Hammond. Yeah,
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it was either Amanda Hammond or Linda Zayas Palmer.
Yeah.
And Linda started about a week before me, and Amanda and I started about the same time.
Mhm.
So I was pretty sure it was her. And it's the sort of thing. I was like, I'm glad that I didn't try to get the development position because I probably wouldn't have.
Yeah, I was
Going against those
Amanda
two, right?
would be really tough. I don't know Linda's background as well. I interviewed both of them. I should remember it. But I do recall I was amazed at how experienced Amanda was, all the work that
Oh
she
yeah, yeah. She's
so
done a lot. Linda was huge with the organized play in
right.
it. So
I
she
remember that.
does, and obviously she still is as development manager for that. But she just knew that game inside out from playing it so much. At least,
Mhm.
of course, she's also very smart. So
Now when you were editing, that was for Pathfinder when you first came,
yep,
right?
yeah, yeah. That was for the
And
the first group.
yeah, and
Was it?
then when you switched to developer, were you a developer for Starfinder right off the bat or
Not quite. I got put on like one or two of the player companions to sort of like
right,
test, sort of a test run, but also sort of a if someone needs to do them while some other people are working on Starfinder.
right, right.
So I did a couple of those, and Amanda was actually training me on that. And then it came to be like, well, we also need some. And again, this is also James Sutter was like, we need some more people on the Starfinder team. Do you want to come on over and work on the core rulebook? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I love base stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kinda neat to have been on the ground floor for that then, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, I got. Do you want to? This is a funny story. I don't know if I've told anyone this, at least on a podcast. But at some point, we were we're doing playtesting some stuff, and we needed to have some like enemies, right? So Pathfinder's goblins are big and huge. Everyone loves the goblins. So I just started. I was like, I'll just take this and I'll write some numbers down, and I'll just call it a space goblin. Isn't that hilarious? And it was just mostly a joke.
Mhm.
And then with the playtest, and then James was like, oh, when we the first thing we actually really did for Starfinder was the free RPG day, kind of like quote unquote bonus bestiary called Starfinder First Contact, where we just had
Right.
some stats.
Yep.
And James was like, well, you got to put the space goblin in there. I'm like, but that was a joke. It should be just a goblin in space. And no, we're gonna put a and then okay, we'll make a space goblin, and then. I don't remember whose idea exactly it was to put him in a bubble helmet
Mhm.
and that had a bandage on. I mean, that was the artist
Right.
probably put the bandage on, but it was just sort of like it became this iconic thing like right away. And I always feel like, oh, these things can. You got to be careful about what you say, especially in around the Starfinder group in a lot of ways because things can be a little more open, a little more gonzo. Uh, and so when you start talking about space goblins, people are like space goblins. They're called space goblins now. Okay, great.
No, that's the first time I came across Starfinder was at that free RPG day when that came out, and
Hmm.
actually I met Scott Kime, at, Gadgets and Gizmos over in Kirkland. I don't know if you're
Hmm.
familiar with that.
Man, yeah, I think so.
It was adjacent to Vernon Wells, where Vernon Wells is, if you know where that is. The store's not there anymore, but,
Right.
my former, DM, Rob Helm, who's in my actual play now with Intrepid Heroes, he was gonna run, RuneQuest. He's a huge RuneQuest fan. So he invited me out there to play, and so I played that, and Scott Kime played, and we played at the table, and Scott said, "Oh, yeah, I work at Paizo. We have this thing over here. You should check it out." It was, First Contact.
Mhm.
Starfinder free RPG thing. So I got that. And anyway, so he invited us over to his house to start playing Pathfinder. So we played the uh, beginner box for
Mm.
Pathfinder,
Yeah.
and then shortly after that, Starfinder was released at Gen Con. I didn't know it was coming then, and I'm huge sci-fi fantasy fan, and so as soon as that came out, I got that, and I got actually the core rule book for my birthday, which is in August, so right after it
Oh,
released
very
at
good.
Gen Con, and then we started playing at Scott's house with Incident at Absalon Station and went through all of Dead Sons there, and that's how we got Ron involved. Well, um, yeah, well, that's really neat that you were so instrumental then to so many parts of Starfinder. Then,
Yeah, I mean, I worked on the first Alien Archive. I worked on the
yeah.
Pack Worlds book. I did some work on the core rule book, like just sort of pass it. Actually, I worked on the Legacy chapter
Mm-hmm.
extensively. Saying like, oh well, what do you do to how do you take your Pathfinder first edition character and
Right,
push
right.
them out of the airlock into space? Oh well, you got to change the hit dice to this and so, that kind of stuff. Um, Yeah, so I've been at it since the beginning, kind of. I wasn't part of like the initial concepting of like classes and that kind of thing, but my fingerprints are in that DNA to mix metaphors.
Hmm. Now, so that was kind of where you started. What is your official title now?
I am the development manager,
Okay. So, like Ron was the development manager for
yes,
Pathfinder, you're the development manager for
the Starfinder
Starfinder.
team. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So I definitely got an upgrade in co-host. Good. That works out well.
I mean,
Uh,
I would say lateral. It's a lateral move for you, John.
no, but it's the focus because we are a Starfinder focused podcast.
Yes.
So, to get the Starfinder development managers is good. Now, I do have a question for you, and this is very pertinent to me.
All
So,
right.
I noticed that we have Jason Keeley, we
Mm-hmm.
had Jason Tondro,
Mm-hmm.
John Compton was in
Mm-hmm.
there, Joe Piscini.
Mm-hmm.
Then you add Jenny Garzabski and
Mm-hmm.
Jessica Catalan. So,
Mm-hmm.
does the fact that my name starts with a J mean I have a higher than average chance to get in the Star Chamber?
Definitely, 100%. We don't. We only look at candidates whose names start with J. We do joke about that obviously a lot because
Yeah,
it's pretty obvious. At one point, we had before Tondro left, we were kind of flirting with the idea of calling ourselves the J Squadron and
yeah,
having call signs like Star Wars.
yeah,
Um, but it is what it is because we don't we've also technically got Thurston Hillman in there. Yeah, so
yeah.
he's not a J name, but I guess he's an honorary J. We'll say.
And you
I'm
had
sure he would
Owen in
probably
there
hate that.
before too,
Yeah, we
right?
had Owen, we had Robert
Yeah,
Gray. We
so it
didn't have
wasn't
a lot.
always the case.
It
Yeah,
wasn't always the case, but it just sort of
yeah,
it became that way
yeah.
over the course of the a couple years, just by coincidence, really.
So, and now this kind of leads to another question. In that, so I know, so Jason Tondro, referred to him as Jake, right?
Yeah, Jake. Yeah,
Right, because you have a Jason Bullman who's like the
that's right.
first Jason, right? Now, for you, everybody calls you Keeley. Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
Yeah, pretty
So,
much.
yeah. So on this show, you want to go by Jason or you want to go by Keeley?
I leave it up to whoever's talking to me. I'll be honest with you. I
Okay.
answer to a lot of different, not a lot, maybe like three names,
Yeah.
essentially. I was actually often, being the age that I am, I always knew another Jason.
Right.
Essentially, I was, for a lot of times, friends with them. So I've been being called Keeley most of my life. Jason is sort of what generally what family calls me, or people who don't know me that well generally call me just Jason. And then there's the third nickname, which is based off of my Twitter handle, Hers Westons, and a lot of people that I know call me Hersey. So I answer to all kinds of names.
All right. Well, for the purposes of this podcast, I think we're going to go with Jason
That makes
only so
sense.
we get the alliteration.
That makes
You know,
sense.
with with Ron, we had the rhyming, and so now
Mhm.
we'll go with the alliteration, which I think is a higher form of. You have to tell me, you're the English guy. Is that kind of a higher form of
Oh god.
prose? Uh,
It's
alliteration
definitely
versus rhyming?
now this was rhyming. It's hmm. Well, the thing about rhyming, in a weird way, rhyming is a lot is kind of similar to assonance, which is
Mm.
the vowel similar vowel sounds,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's they're close. They're close cousins, I would say.
Okay, okay.
I don't like to choose sides. John, you'll find that for myself. I'll try to be like, well, this is pretty good, but this is also pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, I think we're gonna go with. I'm not sure if we're gonna go with Jason and John or John and Jason. I don't know you. So when I did it with Ron, basically,
Hmm.
only time that comes up is when I'm posting about one of our episodes, and I
Yeah.
usually put whoever is kind of talking more or driving the topic, they just come first. Kind of how that
Okay.
goes, but I think on yeah, we'll figure it out. That's something.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, one of those things that doesn't really matter, but once we get into our rut, then I'm sure we'll keep going. Now, you spend all day, not all day, but your work day spent doing Starfinder,
That's right.
right?
Yeah, pretty.
So
Yeah.
for this show, I don't want it to come across as work for you. So,
I would never.
but what can we do to make it more fun and still be Starfinder oriented, do you think?
I mean, I one of the things I'm definitely going to need to do is not talk about the things that I can't quite talk about
Oh yeah,
because we
yeah,
haven't been announced,
sure.
whatever. And I know stuff a year or two in advance, practically.
Right. Right.
And so I have to take that back. So what might be fun to talk about, not every time, but definitely fun to talk about, um, what's happening. I mean, and I don't want to come across as a shill either, right? Oh,
Oh
this is
yeah.
the latest, greatest product, right? But so in a lot of ways, we want to talk about you know ways to make your Starfinder game better or more fun, or
Mhm.
influences that you and I have for science fiction related material that's not Starfinder, but that could be possibly pulled into your Starfinder game. Inspirations of media, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I'm happy to talk about so much sci-fi stuff that we could go like a month or three without talking about Starfinder and just talk about
Oh.
TV and movies and video games, but and books and whatnot. But we can always.
What's your favorite sci-fi book?
All right, I'm gonna just if you throw that at me, it's probably Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, yeah,
I've read that so many times,
yeah.
and that is just formative for me in my
Mhm.
brain, of how my brain works and how I think about sci-fi. You'll probably find that when I'm working on the stuff that I've worked on, you might be able to recognize a little bit of whack kookiness sometimes, or things that I
Mhm.
pitch might get a little kooky. If I can get it, I go as kooky as I can get away with, and then it'll be up to the rest of the Starfinder team to pull me back. But most I'm finding a lot of times they're like, "Yeah, do it," and I'm like, "Oh wow, okay." Um, so that's good. There is, I mean, I read, I read a lot of God, what is his name? Paul Anderson?
Oh, yeah, Paul Anderson.
The Time Cop series? Not Time Cops,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
I read a lot of that. That was a lot of series and lots of um,
Mhm.
short novels and whatnot. And Alfred Bester, I think, would probably be mine. Have Spacesuit Will Travel,
Okay. Right, right,
is
right.
Alfred Bester. I might be butchering that though. Which means I'm immediately thinking about googling it. There was another one that I can't remember the name of that I have still on my shelf. Um, The Star's My Destination. That's it is. Yes, he did not write Have Spaceship Will Travel, but he wrote The Star's My Destination. That's
Yeah,
still on my list.
when I was growing up, I read a lot of hard science
Hmm.
fiction, and one of my favorite, actually, pair of authors was, Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. I mean, I don't know if
Hmm.
that's kinda really old school. Um, I also liked the early cyberpunk stuff, so, Count Zero and
Oh yes,
Yeah,
Oh, the
William
Norman.
Gibson
Oh,
stuff,
yeah, William Gibson stuff.
Neuromancer, and
Neil Stevenson, right? Um, uh, are you familiar with Neil Stevenson? The Snow Crash, Diamond Age. That's some great sci-fi stuff. Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, 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 that's fine. I'm just trying. Yeah, one of the things for my job, I read for a living, basically,
Hmm,
and
yeah,
so I don't have near as much free time. I was a voracious reader all through junior high, high school, college, and then even on ship because I was on ship for 6 years after I graduated. I would read a lot, but since then, I have very little time to read for fun. That's one of the things I would like to get back into, but it's hard
yeah,
now
it
when you
is.
have so many other things pulling in.
Yeah, well, I definitely my reading dropped way off when I stopped having to take the subway.
Yes.
Riding the subway was a great time to read. I mean, I would be reading like Pathfinder Adventure Paths,
Yeah.
and game rule books, but I would also read lots of other books.
Mhm.
And since I moved out here, it's become very difficult. Podcasts kind of replaced that a little bit for the when I
Right.
would walk to the office and back. But then since the pandemic, I fell behind on all my podcasts as well. So, but I have started to pick up reading a little more, grabbing um, Libby, if you're familiar with that, is a library app
Oh,
that I
yeah,
have
yeah.
you can get on your phone, and reading that. And literally just last week went back to a physical book,
Mhm.
which is kind of new. I haven't really. I mean, except for I guess the stuff that I get from Paizo, I flip through physical book wise. It's another role playing game book that I've ordered.
Mhm.
But for a novel, I haven't picked up a physical novel this week.
You ever do books on tape?
Sometimes, yes. It's actually just finished listening to "This Is How You Lose the Time War." A very interesting and very weird book about two time traveling agents who were fighting against each other, but then they're writing each other letters, and
Oh,
they clearly fall in love, but it's also very strange. They're
sounds
coming
like
from
The
competing futures,
Notebook.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit like those, or the Lake House.
Yeah, The Lake
Um,
House, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, yeah,
and then there was
yeah.
another one that I can't quite remember the name of the title of, but it was about a clearly a post-apocalyptic
Mhm.
future in which the robots didn't destroy everyone; they just left and I guess go live in the woods. And
Huh.
then, but this tea monk is accidentally stumbles into a robot who's come and is like, "I want to learn about humans," and then they kind of have an
Huh.
adventure together. And that's like the first in a series, so there'll be more of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I did, I've been doing some book on tape because I can listen to that while I'm doing other things. I like a podcast. I did all
Mhm.
the Expanse books on tape.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
love the Expanse series, and then it ended, and I wanted to keep going,
Hmm.
and then they've since come out with a couple more. But that's like one of my favorite sci-fi series because I really like the
Yeah.
science part of things. I like science fantasy, some with Star Wars and things like that, but the sci-fi part is really what gets me. Even actually with Starfinder, I have easier time writing that,
Hmm.
even though I've done a lot of the magic part. Um, I will bring up one more thing, and then I think we'll have to wrap this up.
Okay.
And so I've actually done a bunch of contracts for Paizo, a bunch of Starfinder stuff. I've never worked with you. I've never
Yeah.
worked with you, and I'm not going to say that that should stay this way. But one of the things that talking to Jake and talking to Ron and some other folks there is that oftentimes the developers are friendly with the people that are doing writing for them.
Yeah.
It's not like they're playing favorites, but if they know somebody who's competent to do stuff, just because they know them, they don't blackball them from being able to write for them. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some friendliness that happens. There's some people who are just like, oh, we work really well together. This person knows what I want and whatever.
Hmm.
And it just comes down to like uh, uh, being at the. It's kind of like being in the right place at the right time. a
Right.
lot of times too. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
because doing the adventure pass mostly. I would assign things in chunks, and then not nothing for another big chunk of
Right.
time. Right.
Right.
So it becomes difficult to get to and then when I do have stuff, it's not as much stuff as you might be in a hardcover. So
Right.
I have to be a little not well, I don't want to say selective in terms of like that I chose like I didn't choose not to work with you. It just never really kind of happened, I
Right.
think.
No, no, no. I'm not saying anything like that.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, okay.
What I'm saying is in
This
the
is an ambush here.
future
Gotcha journalism.
in the future, it's okay if I work with you, right? Even though we're doing a
It's
show?
definitely okay that we work
Okay.
together. I
Okay. So, I look
will
forward to
yeah,
that whenever the timing happens.
whatever it
So,
happens.
okay.
All
All
right, I gotta
right.
write that down now. Okay.
So, yeah, usually our shows go about this long, so,
All right, yeah.
I think we gotta wrap it up. Well, I'm John.
And I'm Jason, and this has been Digital Divination.
All right.